So Kennedy class 1, no retention. Where is the problem? Class 1 is strict tissue retained. The problem could be in the base. The question, that's what it says. You have a Kennedy class 1, no retention. Where is the problem? The answer is class 1 is strict tissue retained, so the problem could be in the base. We're going to review Kennedy. Removable partial dentures. Kennedy classification is based on the most posterior dental area to be restored. Although class 3 and 4 restorable partial dentures are entirely supported by abutment teeth, the class 1 and class 2 removable partial dentures are supported by abutment teeth, the residual ridges, subjacent tissues, and fibrous connective tissue overlying the alveolar process. Alveolar ridge resorption under the distal extension of the removable partial denture is a concern, but is reduced by maximizing coverage of these supporting areas. Again, the alveolar ridge resorption under the distal extension of the removable partial denture is a concern, but is reduced by maximizing the coverage of these supporting areas. Periodontal damage to abutment teeth is avoided with firm tissue support, maintaining a stable base-tissue relationship. So, in a class 1 Kennedy, bilateral edentulous areas posterior to the natural teeth. Okay? It's a bilateral distal extension. A class 2 is unilateral edentulous area posterior to remaining natural teeth. Unilateral distal extension. Kennedy class 1 and 2 must have mesial rest on the abutment next to the posterior edentulous space. Class 3, unilateral edentulous area with natural teeth. Again, unilateral edentulous area with natural teeth both anterior and posterior to it. A tooth-borne removable partial denture because it depends entirely on abutment teeth for support. Now, a class 4 is a single but bilateral. A class 4 is a single but bilateral edentulous area anterior to remaining natural teeth. It must cross the midline. So anterior teeth are missing and across the midline. Does not have modification spaces. A tooth-borne removable partial denture type because it depends entirely on abutment teeth for support. Occlusal rests are placed on the distal, on the first premolars. So, regarding the Kennedy classification, there is 8 rules that were made by Applegate. So they're known as the Applegate's rules for applying Kennedy's classification. Rule number 1, the classification is done after the extractions are done. Rule number 2, if a third molar is missing and will not be replaced, it's not part of the classification. Rule number 3, if a third molar is present and not used as an abutment, it's not part of the classification. Rule number 4, if a second molar, so pretty much if a third molar is present, it will be only counted if it needs to be included in the removable partial denture. Rule number 4, if a second molar is missing and will not be replaced, it's not considered in the classification. Rule number 5, the most posterior area always determines the classification. Rule number 6, edentulous areas other than those determining the classification are modifications. 7, the extent of the modification is not considered, only the number of additional edentulous areas. Rule number 8, no modification areas in a Kennedy class 4, because a Kennedy class 4 is a single but bilateral edentulous area. Anterior teeth are missing across the midline, does not have modification spaces. Okay. Major and minor connectors must be rigid to evenly distribute functional stresses applied to the removable partial denture throughout the mouth. Major connectors, they connect components between both sides of the arches. Major connectors must be rigid, so stress applied to the area of the denture are effectively distributed over the entire supporting area. Major connector is free of movable tissues and does not impinge on gingival tissue. Relief should be provided for major connectors. Bony and soft tissue prominences are avoided during placement and removal. Major connectors most frequently encounter interferences from lingually inclined mandibular premolars. Again, major connectors most frequently encounter interferences with lingually inclined mandibular premolars. Now, the minor connectors are rigid components that connect the major connector to the components, which are the direct retainers, indirect retainers, etc. Also transfer functional stress to abutment teeth and transfer the effects of the retainers, rests, and stabilizing components to the rest of the denture. So they have an abutment to prosthesis function. They must be 1.5 millimeters thick, preserve the tissues. This means that they will not impinge marginal gingiva, and is highly polished. Maximal gingival exposure equals joints at right angle. Okay? And minimum of 5 millimeter space between vertical component. A minimum of 5 millimeter space between vertical component. So the question is Kennedy class 1. Remember that Kennedy class 1 is a bilateral edentulous areas posterior to the natural teeth, bilateral distal extension. And I need to review that something pretty quick.